Welcome to today's edition of Global Affairs. I'm your host, Stephen Christensen, and we've got a special show for you today, coming to you from Los Angeles, California. Welcome. Before we begin, our special guest is an author, a distinguished professor, just finished writing a book. But before we interview our special guest, the individual who assisted in putting together the book and writing the foreword is with us, actually, to do a little introduction about the book. So please join me in welcoming Beatrice DeSalles.
Thank you, Stephen.
So tell us, you wrote the foreword for the book.
Correct.
Tell us a little bit about the inspiration that you had in putting that together.
So when Dr. Wale called me and he was telling me that he was writing this book, I had at the same time, by coincidence, friends in Afghanistan who were asking me to help. It was the same time that the evacuation happened. And I had three friends, two of them diplomats, and another one a local journalist, desperate with the situation, two women and a man. And I didn't know what to do. And they really were asking they couldn't access food anymore, they were worried, and I got very inspired by all the research he was doing and of not being able to do much. I researched a lot. The history of women in Afghanistan is very interesting. There were queens before, there's royalty, that's a lot. It's very rich. It's a pity that nowadays this is happening to women in Afghanistan. So I decided to write the foreword and edit the book for this reason.
Oh, so it had a special place in your heart. You had a first-hand experience. Exactly. And the professor invited you to do that. So I'm sure when people get the book and read it, they'll be inspired even by your foreword in the book.
I hope so.
Okay, well, thank you for coming in and just sharing that and sort of setting the stage for the other special guest today, our distinguished professor. So let me introduce to you our special guest. I'll just give you a little background. So today we have with us Dr. Wale Idris Ajibade. Dr. Wale, please join me here. So a little bit about him. So he is a native of Nigeria, but currently living in the New York City area. He is an expert in sustainable growth and economics, distinguished professor of international law and order, expertise in global economics and philosophy. So this will be interesting, economics and philosophy, if we can bring those two together. Anyway, he also is the founder of a nonprofit organization called
African Views.
African Views, consultant to the United Nations Economic and Social Council, and the author of this brand new book right here, The Long Struggle for Gender Harmony in Afghanistan. Now, I don't know, to write a book about the struggle for gender harmony in Afghanistan, which has been going on for thousands of years. Maybe this is volume 1 and there'll be volume 2 and 3, but it's available on Amazon and any place that you want to find these kind of books. But we're going to talk to, he said I could call him Dr. Wale, it's a little bit easier. We're going to talk to Dr. Wale today about his book and about how it came about and some of the key points in it. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
What a pleasure to have you, such a scholar and author and so forth. So first thing I always like to do, and I have my guests on, is for them to hear a little bit about your background and how you came up with the idea. What inspired you to write this book on this topic? So maybe there's a backstory to this.
Absolutely, and it's one thing leading to another. It started with, every one of us outraged after the exit of the United States.
Yes.
Of course, we're all concerned, so I just instinctively wrote a reaction comment about this in a group that I belong to, and many people got many feedbacks, and I realized that this has got to turn into something more, because I realized that we needed to be collectively more educated on this issue. So a friend and I decided to collaborate and write an op-ed in the Al Jazeera newspaper. And as I was working on that, and I realized it's so difficult to do justice to this story. So it turned out to become an academic paper, which I usually do have like hundreds of that out there. So I was going to write an academic paper. While I was writing this academic paper, my daughter, Soraya, who was named after one of the queens in Afghanistan, came to me and was so excited that I was writing about someone, Soraya. So, and she says, who's this? And I said, actually, you're named after her. And she was very excited because she never really could, there was never a real necessity to put a face to who and why she was named Soraya. So that was an opportunity, and then we began the discussion. And she said, with her sister, I'd love to read this book. Then I realized that I have to write this book in such a way that children could read it, which is why there's a lot of illustration in the book.
So the thing is, for most of us, not all of us, not for scholars, but for people like myself, it is so complicated in that part of the world. There's so much history, there's so much conflict, there's so much going on. So this is a book that can sort of open the eyes for people like myself that we know a little bit from the TV or something, but so this will take us deeper into the whole background and how the sort of problems are there today.
Exactly.
Does it talk a little bit about what the future might hold? Do you get into that as well?
Absolutely.
You know, because we'll talk about the book a little bit,
Yes.
but we're not going to give away everything because you really need to get the book. It's a regular reading. We have winter vacation coming up, summer vacation, and it's a great read. But I'm going to ask you a few questions about the book. And by the way, so he's a global economist, MBA in finance. So we got someone that really knows what they're talking about here. So first, I know that Americans, we were sort of not so happy with the way the withdrawal took place. I mean, you hear the arguments on both sides. We could have done something different. It's always easier to look back and say we could have done something different. But talk about the withdrawal and what really happened and what we could have or should have done differently, or, you know.
Well, it's difficult to say what we could have done differently. The exit obviously was abrupt and really unexpected, all the reactions. And I think that's due to false intelligence on our side. Yes. For the last 5 years, so to speak, there has been a shift in the policy towards Afghanistan. First of all, the Afghan people too were dissatisfied with the type of governance that they have. Even though it's democracy, yes, they're very happy, but it appears, and this is often the case of the evolution of democracy at its onset. So many Afghan government representatives are believed to be corrupt. So they've been very dissatisfied with them. That's one of the issues. The other issue is the fact that the previous administration decided to have a peace agreement with the Taliban.
Okay.
And the peace agreement really, I don't want to give it away, it's in the book, but the peace agreement really dictates what was going to happen. So
The terms and conditions.
The terms and conditions, and the condition that we stipulated was that Afghanistan would not be used to cultivate or breed terrorists, because that's really why we went there in the first place.
Okay.
So, and they agreed to that. This really meant a ceasefire for the U.S. That means there was no need for more surge of military presence in Afghanistan. All our presence and effort was more technical support, preparing the Afghan army and the Afghan police force, really creating a sovereign infrastructure to support the government. And that's what we've done in the last really 6-7 years. But in the last 5 years, there was no need again for war with the Taliban. And the Taliban had used that to come back into the country, saturate the country. Kabul was the last stand. So by the time the new administration came in, Kabul was the only place that needed to be taken.
Oh, I see. So before we get into the issue of the impact on the women particularly, which is a good part of your book, a little bit also background about Afghanistan. I mean, the Russians were there many years ago fighting a war.
Mhm.
They didn't win it. We went there. I'm sure other countries, we didn't win it. I mean, it doesn't matter what the U.S. government says, we didn't win. And so why does everybody keep going to Afghanistan and fighting them and not winning? Well, so first, why are they going there and fighting them? And why are the two greatest superpowers in the world we can't even win?
And you've got to ask yourself, Why Afghanistan? Because they really they don't have anything of use, to be honest with you. There's no.
So what were we fighting over?
Yeah, there's no real natural resources there. Nothing grows there except poppy seeds. It's really
Drugs, poppy seeds.
Yeah.
So was it about a drug war too, or no?
It was a large part of it which we missed. A large part of this because the drug lords were forced really by the condition of the terrain and climate in Afghanistan to go into this type of trade. And this was a long time ago. This has always been the contention with the government, whether it's the Russian intervention or the American. It's always been with the government because they wanted to cultivate the poppies. That's the only trade crops that they have.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So, and that you can imagine allow them to breed terrorists and allow them to breed an army to protect that. So that's what the Russians went after. These guys needed to be disciplined, they needed to be cultivated, they needed to be moved into the capital. And that's where the problem really, really started.
It's funny. It seems like the Afghan country could have a museum of military equipment from all the countries around the world because the Russians left stuff there. I think there's more jets, U.S. jets left there than some of them that we have in the U.S.
Clearly. And we really we underestimated the Afghan army, to be honest with you. They were well equipped. And the strategy was really interesting because as they continued to take over different provinces, they were taking over a great deal of sophisticated ammunition from either NATO or the United States. Okay, just like they did with the Russians. So they by the time they got to Kabul, they were ready. And then acquiring all that is in Kabul that the US had to leave behind because, think about how much we've spent in Afghanistan.
Oh, billions.
6 trillion.
Trillions.
6 trillion.
Oh, I thought it was hundreds of billions.
6 trillion. It's not a joke.
That's more than the U.S. national debt.
Yes. So 2.7 trillion so far, but by the time this gets paid, it's 6 trillion with the interest.
So, you say we underestimated the Afghan army.
Absolutely.
I guess the U.S. is pretty good. We have a pattern of this because it seemed like in the 70s, we underestimated the Vietnamese willpower of the Viet Cong and the same outcome.
Yes, indeed. It's very funny that that happened again. A lot of people drew parallels between Afghanistan and the exit of Vietnam. And it's inevitable to look at these parallels. We just like the same way we negotiated for peace with the not Vietnamese, is the same way we did with the Taliban. Because if you remember, Henry Kissinger, Secretary of State at that time, really negotiated for peace, and he was the one that this one is what all of this happened. It's the same thing here that Secretary Mike Pompeo was the one who was in charge and oversaw all this peace negotiation. And the Taliban, just like the Viet Cong, really were just laughing at us because they knew once they got back in power, that's all they wanted. And the difference in this time was that we really made a mistake. This mistake, I think, is fresh, and it's hard to compare it to Vietnam. But it's look at the airport. If you remember, look at the airport while people were trying to get out of Afghanistan. Look at the chaos. Look at the Afghan people. So many Afghan people, just like it was during the Vietnam. And funny enough, the flag planting that we did in Iwo Jima, the Taliban did the same thing just to mock us and say, look at you guys, you're on the run. More importantly, we encouraged them. We encouraged Taliban, or the Taliban are encouraged, maybe we didn't do it intentionally, but the Taliban are encouraged to believe that they have a military might because they had an infantry that was named 313. This infantry was the same number and the same name infantry that Muhammad used to conquer a great deal of during the Islamic campaign, during the jihad, the early jihad movement. So but to be honest with you, if you look at the prowess of this infantry, they are like ninjas.
Really?
Yes. So the Afghan army already knew about them, and they already intimidated. So once they came into Kabul, the Afghan army were ready to surrender, because they weren't prepared to face this particular type of confidence, if you will, that overwhelming confidence that's coming from these people who are spiritually motivated, religiously motivated, and believe that they are on a righteous path.
So that's also then the challenge, I haven't been engaged in war, but, when one country is attacking or fighting another, and they're fighting to take over, and the other country is fighting for their life and survival, there's no way you can really estimate, particularly as you said, spiritually motivated. This is not a war to them. This is all or nothing.
This is all or nothing. Yes.
It's a total different situation.
That's the difference.
Okay.
You nailed it.
So let's shift to now this topic of the gender harmony and the role of women. So talk a little bit about the background of the role of women historically in Afghanistan, and then we'll come forward to today.
Fascinating part of this is, the story of Afghanistan has different perspectives. One is the male perspective, and then you have the female perspective. So the male perspective is filled with anger, retribution, and war, and all kinds of things like that. And the female perspective of the Afghan war has always been about beauty, interesting, and tragedy. A lot of romance, if you will. It's really fascinating, because the whole fight about Afghanistan is really for the progress of women. The kings have fought this. Afghanistan has been a kingdom before it turned into a republic. During his period of kingdom, right from the period that it became Afghanistan, when the Durand Line was drawn, Durand Line is what divided Afghanistan from Pakistan, and that was done by the colonialist presence of the hegemonic Britain, United Kingdom there, which has been, if you ask any Afghan people, they'll tell you that really is the root or the seed of all the conflict that they had in Afghanistan.
The line in the sand?
The line in the sand, yeah, the line that was drawn between them. And because what happened was, the largest ethnic group in Afghanistan, the Pashtun, were divided right in the middle by this line. So one part of the Pashtun people were given to Pakistan, at that time India, and then Afghanistan. So because of that borderline was never really recognized, and that has caused a lot of conflict between Afghanistan and Russia and even Pakistan. So, and the rest of the people. So anyway, the concept of women is the fact that these queens of Afghanistan over the period of time have fought the Islamic clerics, because it's all about, see, the root of this, again, as mentioned, the effort of the rural area trying to keep hold of their farming strategies of farming their produce, and using Islam as the fundamental reason for keeping their lifestyle, their ways of life. That's very important. They had to use that principle to keep women suppressed, because first of all, if you think about it, the right of religion in Islamic religion says that the man dictates pretty much what becomes of the women. And the kings of Afghanistan have tried to for several, maybe even millennia, tried to bring resolute to the women and try to negotiate with the clerics that the women can advance, and education, etc., all of those things. And the queens of Afghanistan have been very instrumental in this process. This is why those two queens were in front.
So
of the book.
these are two queens?
These are the two queens, and that's Queen Soraya, and that's Queen Humaira.
Soraya, your daughter's name.
Exactly.
Wow.
And Queen Soraya was the one who, when the king asked the clerics to show him where in the Quran or the Sharia that dictates to women to wear burqa or the veil and keep women suppressed and oppressed. And of course, the clerics couldn't show him that. And he said, these are not required for women in Afghanistan. That women should be free to go to school, study, and do, and you know, be pretty much have their rights in the society. The queen got up and she tore off veil. And those are very symbolic. Those are very symbolic gestures that.
It's interesting you put here the subtitle, in honor of the brave Afghan women.
Indeed, indeed. And that's why men will continue to fight this war among themselves, and women will win it, because it's a cultural war. And we've already seen, the book predicts that women will, because we've spent 20 years there. You know, it's different from the 10 years of the Soviet invasion. The US has planted a great seed there. They have planted freedom in the hearts of women. The US have done a great deal of work, so I don't really consider us losing this war. I think, you know, we've won this war several times and we'll continue to win this war because we have invested in humanity, and humanity will continue to win this war. So,
Okay, so maybe we could say we lost a few battles,
we'll
but
win
in the
war.
long run,
We'll win the war.
yeah, it's kind
It's
of
inevitable.
Yeah,
The women
inevitable.
will win it.
So, you know, and the thing is, we talk about a paradigm shift, right?
Yes.
When the human mind is exposed to a new way of thinking
Yes.
and a new point of view,
Yeah.
it actually cannot contract. It's always going to be in the mind.
Always going to be there.
And the only way is someone else to kind of control it, but that thought will never leave your mind. You've been exposed to a new way of thinking. So
Exactly.
let's talk about that, because
Yeah.
again, I'm not the scholar on this topic, but I do know that when we were there, the women and the children, the girls, were able to go to school and have
Yes.
education
Yes.
and things of this nature. And of course, the first thing when the Taliban took over back again, the boys were going to school and the girls were not allowed to go to school again.
Yes.
So what's going to be the future in this country where women were exposed to equal rights and freedoms, and the girls were? Of course, I'm speaking as the father of 4 daughters, so you know I'm a proponent for everything great that women can do. I often tell people that I work with that sometimes I find that the best man for the job is a woman, and that my
I
daughters
agree.
can do anything that any man can do better. But anyway, so here's Taliban, and the first thing they go back to shall I say, maybe they're attempting to go back to the old way, and maybe they'll get there temporarily. But what's really going to happen now with these women and the girls?
Well, you know, first of all, we need to understand that even the Taliban have evolved. That's very important. And their process or point in evolution is that they are slightly opening up, slightly.
Okay.
But they needed to defend their turf, saying, yeah, you know, we are Wahhabis, which is a particular type of Islamic sect. And they needed to hold on to that principle.
Okay.
While that is there, if you remember 20 years ago, they did not allow television,
Right.
let alone internet. Right now, they are happy to be in front of television. They are giving interviews. They are welcoming press. They are on the internet, and you know, they're softened. So that there's a progress. And the same thing, I believe, is with women. However, they are still saying that when it comes to women, Sharia dictates, which is why in this book, a lot about Sharia was written to query where, again, this idea of Sharia dictates comes from the Taliban, or where we could compare and validate what they actually mean. But what's important to know is that certain region, first of all, the women will not give in. And the proof is this, because in certain region, women already are challenging the Taliban and saying that girls must go to school. So there was a teachers association Now again, going back to the legacy, our legacy, the U.S. legacy in Afghanistan. So you have a teachers association.
Oh, I see. Yeah,
See,
yeah.
a teachers association rising up and going to the local government and saying, look, it's unacceptable that girls cannot go to school. And they drove that point into the point where the Taliban really just gave them the right to open the school for girls again. So at least in that region of Herat, it's happening. It's loud. And, you know, we have one of our colleagues, Sara Kazimi, who runs our World Orphanage Foundation. During the period when everybody was running away from Afghanistan, this lady went to Afghanistan to look into the heart of things, and that shows the type of tenacity that women will have to confront Taliban. And she's taken this book with her, and she has given this book to the Taliban to read.
Really?
Yes.
And to the kids too.
So one of the things I saw on TV, and again, it was pretty much after, you know, immediately after the U.S. withdrawal, you know, and maybe I'm sure part of it was for show and all of this, and maybe things have changed these last few weeks. But I mean, I saw the video from a friend of mine in India sent to me of the Taliban stopping a woman walking down the street, interrogating her, very unhappy with her, made her kneel on her knees, and then laughed as they shot her in the head.
It's highly probable. There's been few incidents. I can't even say few. There's been some incidents like that in different areas. I'm sure that it's happening also in Kabul. Perhaps many of it even unreported, because how many people have confidence to actually take a video or go and report this in the press and things like that. So it's happening. And even the Taliban, don't forget, these are people who have been for 20 years, some of them just born into this wilderness and raised in the wilderness.
Right.
They don't have formal education. All they know in their lives is, throughout their lives is war.
Yes,
So
yes, yes,
they
yes.
have no discipline, and they have
So it's
saturated
normal
young.
almost for some of them.
This for them. That's their MO. So the head of the Taliban, even as unsophisticated as they are, they realized that they needed the absolute priority is to discipline this so-called army that they have,
Okay.
who are just acting independently, arbitrarily on their own interest. So that is the biggest problem for the Taliban, and the world is holding them to the task by not acknowledging them as a government, by not by all these sanctions that have been brought against Afghanistan, money, the bank accounts been shut down, and all those things, right? Trying to really bring the Taliban to the table and getting them to negotiate properly.
Oh, interesting. So in your book, I mean, I don't know, 20 chapters here or something, but you talk a little bit about a very famous American, one who had a statement that changed the world when he talked to Mr. Gorbachev.
Yes.
And he said, tear down this wall. And that, of course, is the former President Ronald Reagan. Now, how did he get into your book?
Actually, he's the protagonist of this book.
Really?
Absolutely. Yeah, so, we can say all we want about President Reagan, but Ronald Reagan was the hero of the millennia. Because after the Second World War, we started the Cold War. And the Cold War was so detrimental to world development. And none other than Ronald Reagan ended this Cold War. And he did it on a personal and a very high political level. It's unheard of. He really gave so much sacrifice towards that. It's interesting the role that Afghanistan played in that process.
Oh, really?
Yes. Afghanistan, as we know, the Russians had invaded for all the reasons that's in the book. But when Charlie and Joan Herring, actually it was Joan Herring who convinced Charlie to get on to support her for our, it's really, if we look at this, it's really a Joan Herring's war. So Joan Herring is the one that got Charlie on that side to support the Afghan people to fight against the Russians. And together they sold that to Reagan. It was difficult. A lot of people say the CIA were involved, but the CIA really was completely, distant to this war. They never wanted to show face, and there was no clear, direct intervention until Joan Herring got into this war, got Charlie into this war, and they sold it to Reagan. When they sold it into Reagan, Reagan saw it clearly that this is a great opportunity to end the Cold War. I stated in the book, and I'll give that away because it's something we all should know. Joan and Charlie had the biggest. They had a great dream, and Reagan had said, "America is too great for small dreams," but Reagan had the biggest dream of all. And that's why he could make such statement. So he really had a heart for the Afghan people. He instituted an act in the United States making March 21st an Afghanistan Day in the United States.
Do we still celebrate that today?
We should ask the Congress, I don't know.
Yeah.
But it should be celebrated. And this is important. If you understand what Reagan understood, then it becomes really, really clear. And Afghanistan was such a strategic, a very key, instrumental opportunity for the whole world in this case, because it was that direct influence of Charlie and Joan and Reagan. While Reagan was working on the diplomatic end, Joan and Charlie were working with the Afghans to make sure they break the back of the Russians. So they frustrated the Russians. The Russians really couldn't fight this war any longer. The war was too costly for Gorbachev. So everything else that Reagan was saying was just border to Gorbachev. So it was easy for Reagan to bring Gorbachev to the table, befriend him, and they drank champagne and everything else together. And the world was beautiful for that moment in time. And yes, eventually Gorbachev tore down the wall and ended the war in Afghanistan. A lot of pressures, years of pressure from Reagan. Now, once that's done, this is what we need to realize. How the world changed in the 80s, because this was the advent of the computer, this was the advent of the internet, and all of these were possible because the East and the West were able finally to work together and exchange information.
Yeah, almost instantaneous.
Almost
right?
instantaneous, which was impossible before because of the Cold War. They would shoot you down if you knew about the internet, because that's like, wow,
So technology had a big role in this too.
Absolutely. This is what opened the door for all of that.
Interesting. Well,
Yes.
so here's it's a simple-minded question. I mean, every country has their struggles, the governments, they do things their own way and all of this. Besides the issue of drugs and terrorism and human rights, I mean, why should the U.S. citizen be concerned about Afghanistan? We have our own problems in our own country we have to solve. We cannot solve the whole world's problem. So for the average, everyday working American, what's the significance or impact of Afghanistan?
That's a wonderful question. And we have to go back to the beginning. Why did we go to Afghanistan in the first place? Why the U.S.? Okay, we knew why the Russians got in there. But why the U.S.? And if you remember, it's because of terrorism. Afghanistan is still number one terrorist country.
Number one?
Number one in the entire world. So that, if you remember, even while the U.S. was peacefully exiting Afghanistan, the ISIS came after us and they took wonderful lives of 13 young people. So, and of course, so many Afghans, hundreds of Afghans.
Yeah.
And we have to understand that we have a role in the world to continue to illuminate the minds and the soul of people in the world.
Okay. So it's more than just about us. It's about
the world, and we care about the world. So we need to do that. It's again, if you look at the importance of Afghanistan in this whole thing, it's so critical that we bring peace to these people, because we all deserve peace.
So since you did bring up that issue about the American servicemen lost in the exit. I do just want to take 1 second and express our sympathy and our prayers and condolences, not only to the American servicemen who were lost there and their families, but also to the citizens of Afghanistan who also have been tragically murdered and lost their lives. That just, I want our audience to know that they are in our thoughts and our prayers always. So we are thankful for their service for freedom, for justice, and shall I say, not quite, but the American way.
Absolutely.
So this takes us then to sort of wrapping up here. So what does the future look like? I mean, what's going to happen now? I mean, we know what has happened, and we've got thousands of years of history. So now let's look forward 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. What do you think is going to happen, or what do we want to happen, or what needs to happen?
Well, what will happen is, first of all, we need to find ways to work with the Taliban. We may not accept their terms, but we could negotiate forward with them. They are going to be the government of Afghanistan because there's nothing we can do. We're not going to go back there and start the fight over again.
Okay.
So they have established a new Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. We need to find ways to accept that. There are standards of what a nation is, what defines a nation. They need to meet these standards. They need to understand it. They need to be inserted into the League of Nations or the United Nations, as we call it today. They need to fulfill all the security measures of a nation and the requirements. And I think part of it really includes them opening up their cabinets to women and children. And, you know, these are things that are very normal. Children must grow, and so we have rooms to negotiate with them. Right now, all the sanctions are taking a huge toll on Afghanistan. Children are starving, women, families are dying. Many people have lost their husbands or men in the family. So there is a lot of orphans, roaming the streets, or people complete in disarray. So there needs to be a kind of normalization that should come to Afghanistan. And they need the help of the world. They need the help of the United Nations, but they need our help, our continuous help. Also because we have worked hard 20 years in this society. We can't just leave that to be destroyed by the Taliban. We don't have to fight them again, especially not with weapons, but we can. This is the challenge for us now, is to. The challenge for us now is to really use our acumen, to use our intelligence, wisdom, to bring them to some kind of reasoning, a new way of reasoning, and that's a huge challenge. New way of reasoning. They have, the instrument is Sharia, the instrument is Quran. We understand intelligence. We understand theology. You know, we can talk about these things, and we need to find ways for women to subsist and survive and thrive in this society, and also be part of the decision-making processes. You know, and we share this interest and vision about women in society. So this is very, very critical. Really, the key point of the Afghan society moving forward.
Well, we did spend a lot of energy and time in that country, and we hope that the rest of the world will join us in
Exactly.
encouraging democratic process, freedom for all people, and maybe even, I would have to think that the Taliban leaders at some point will realize that children are the future, and if they're not educating them and preparing them to lead the nation, then they're always going to be a backward nation.
Exactly.
So there's so much more in this book, and as I say, it's available at Amazon.com, and order your copy and learn about. Oh, there's just so much in here. It's just a rich book, and I look forward to going over it again and seeing how this can educate me to prepare my children and my friends for a more intellectual discussion about making the world a safer and better place for everyone. So I want to thank you for your time. I know how busy you are on the consulting and the speaking circuit. And one quick question.
Yes, sir.
when's the next book coming out?
We do
Do you have
yes,
something in
yes,
the,
we
in the
have-
can?
Yes, we have a book we've been working on for the past 6 years now. It's the 100 Peaceful Solutions for Women Advancement Across Cultures. This is the book with so many women from different parts of the world, all the female Nobel laureates. It's a fascinating book contributed to by so many women, as I mentioned, from different parts of the world. Amazing book.
So when will that be out?
As soon as it's ready.
January, February, March?
Hopefully in the first quarter of next year.
I mean, the reason I'm asking, just to be honest, is I want to give my producers a heads up that in 3 months we need to bring you back onto the show and talk about the next book.
Wonderful.
So we look forward to that. So join us again. He'll be back in 2022 with the next book, and we thank you so much. Thank you for joining us today. I hope this show has been informative and insightful, but it'll be more informative and insightful when you read the book. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for bringing us to this program. It is a wonderful media tool for you and for us with global affairs. I just wanted to remind you all to go online. We're going to be presenting the link where you can find the book, and also procedures of this book goes to the World Orphanage Foundation, and they're doing a wonderful job in local there with families and children. So I wanted to remind all of you that these procedures will go for.
Well, that's an additional incentive why to get the book, because the proceeds will help the orphans, and
Exactly.
and everyone should have a mother or father, and so we need to support the orphans and prepare them also for the future leaders of this country.
Thank you.
Thank you.